Hi, Murray.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Misty. You saved my life today.
Because I'm like, it's possible that, trust me, I am glad to help because I don't know. I don't know what it is lately. I'm so scatterbrained lately. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what it is. So I am glad to help because I understand. We all need that little help every now and then.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
You would have realized in like 30 seconds anyway, because you'd have been like, where is everybody?
Like nobody's here. And that's happened before too. Where, but then it was like August, and I was like, oh, there is no August meeting. What am I doing here? How you doing, Murray?
I'm doing great. I've just been on Zoom since 6 this morning, straight through.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot.
Part of it was I was interviewing some people for the book we're writing, so.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, then that wasn't too bad.
But the others were meetings.
Okay. Okay.
Looking forward to tomorrow night.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Hi, Mr.
Hello.
Yeah, we all need that. We all need a little fun.
Murray, have you registered in Hopin?
Yes, I've been on it before.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you got the link whenever you registered for this. I know I had somebody say that they didn't get the link in the registration email when they registered for the event. So I want to make sure.
I haven't done it for this event, but I've done it. I was on the previous event that had it.
I believe that, Cheryl, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if Erica's going to be on here. I'm not sure if you have to register for each individual event. And I believe that you do because it offers you a ticket. And Don is shaking his head yes.
Yeah.
So there is a link. And Murray, I will send it to you too. Please. So that, yep, I'll send it to you. So because I don't want anybody to miss it.
Sheila, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Hey there, everybody.
Hi, Sheila. How are you?
Doing great. Relatively great. I threw my back out this weekend, so that's been.
Oh no.
That's been fun. Yeah.
Oh no.
There are worse things.
Yeah.
Things, but nobody's allowed to be too funny. Nobody make me laugh too hard today.
I know. I'll have to text you this thing because my daughter did it when she was moving.
Yeah.
And it was this thing she bought for Amazon. She got in a couple of days. It was just hook up some little things to your back, and it's, oh my God.
Really?
A friend of hers who's a trainer or works for the Bears told her about it, and they use it. So yeah, I'll send you that information.
I will totally check that out. Awesome. Send it my way.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Alrighty, guys, it's noon, so we're going to get started. Just a couple of announcements. The first announcement is if you have not signed up for our holiday event, Coaching and Cocktails, I think that's the name of it. It's going to be amazing. So much fun. It's tomorrow from 5 until 7:30. And we just are really hoping that you guys will join us. And if you do join us, make sure that you go and register on Hopin, because they'll give you a ticket. And that way, if you've already registered, you should have already gotten your ticket. Right, Misty?
If they register, they have to register on ICF Chicago. When they register there on our website, they get a link as a registration to register with Hopin. And that's the link to, there's like a two-step registration process. So you need to register on our website to get the link to register and Hopin. So, and if anybody doesn't have it, feel free to email me and I will send that to you.
Or even
Yes,
Lily, you could put a
that's-
link in the chat, maybe.
What'd you say, Danny?
Maybe even Lily, you could put a link in the chat for people.
Sure.
Yeah, I can put a link in the chat for just for the website. ICF
Yeah,
Chicago.
just
Yeah,
the first step.
yeah, yeah. Perfect. And then the other announcement, as always, wow, everybody's coming at the same time. If you didn't register for this event, you have up to 3 days to register for it to ensure that you get your credit. All righty. So having said all that, anything else, Misty, we need to share?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. All right, Sheila, it's all yours.
I think I just need
Oh, yeah, I need to make you
power.
the co-host.
Throw me the power over here and I will load it up.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries at all. All right. You guys. Okay. All right. Everyone's seeing that okay? There.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome, awesome. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this month's core competency call. I think a couple of you heard while we were joining that nobody's allowed to be too funny today and make me laugh because I ended up throwing my back out on Saturday, and it's much better today, but it's like one of those things where I'm scared to death. I'm trying to behave and be good so that it doesn't it doesn't go in the other direction anytime soon. But we will dive in today to the new core competency of Cultivates, trust and safety. I see so many familiar faces on these calls. I love, love, love that I have a chance to see so many familiar names and faces. And I love that there's a chance to see so many new names and faces. So friends I have not yet had a chance to meet, which is just awesome. A bit of an introduction. So I am a master certified coach. I have the opportunity to collaborate on these monthly calls with two other fantastic colleagues, Jackie and Susan. You've probably had a chance to sit in and hear some of their core competency calls as well. And if you have not, add that to your 2021 professional development list because they are just amazing and fantastic. I am a business professor at a local university. I predominantly teach graduate students, but a lot of my time in teaching is actually spent working within and teaching within an ICF ACTP accredited graduate program that I created for the university back in 2013. So we've now had 15 cohorts of fantastic coaches trained and graduated through that program. My professional background is predominantly in human resources, and the lens that I look at the world through is usually an OD focus, which is what my terminal degree is in. As we dive into our topic and our content today, we will be looking at an overview of this new model. And I always laugh because at some point we're going to get to a point where, when do we cross that threshold where it's not new and it's just our way of being, right? So that'll be our goal, that eventually we get to that point. But for right now, it still is a transition. There's a bit of bridge work and crosswalking that needs to be done to fully get us over there. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today too. And then really do that deep dive into our competency of focus today, which is Cultivates, trust and safety. So a number of you probably heard me talk about this before. So I'm just going to give a very high level overview. And I think many of you know and or were even maybe intimately involved in one of the many steps along the way that the ICF took to really bring about this new kind of reimagined, reinvigorated competency model. But the overall core competency model was a 5 to 7 year review process in total. And really the process that they leveraged as the foundation of this undertaking is what we call a job analysis. So anyone else who's worked in strategic HR may have personally been involved in job analysis, where you really take a look at what does it take for someone to be effective in the role that they're doing. So conducting that process. They did involve an outside partner, and this process was 100% data driven. So it kicked off in October 27 officially, and it involved interviews with subject matter experts across the entire globe. And the first face-to-face meeting happened in the US, and they worked to develop what they called critical incidents. What are those magic things that are happening in order to make coaching effective and impactful? From there, they went on to a face-to-face workshop in London, where they came up with the tasks, the knowledge, the abilities, and the other characteristics, which if you dive into their process, you're going to see the abbreviation often of KAOs. So knowledge, abilities, and other characteristics. Once they created that huge list, they surveyed almost 1,300 coaches across the globe to really take a look at the task frequency of when this was happening in their effective coaching engagements and what these coaches felt were the importance of these different KAOs. And that's what got them down to the list of 79 core tasks and 56 core KAOs that they were then able to dive a little bit deeper into. Another face-to-face workshop happened in the US, where they really broke apart, analyzed that data, and then that analysis was handed off to the ICF and that external partner, consulting partner, to put together the updated core competency model. Now, a couple things that I think are really important to talk about when we talk about this new core competency model. And I know a number of you who I've collaborated with, talked to, or worked with have heard me say this before, but this simply was not a complete overhaul. This was not let's tear this down and start at the beginning, because one thing that came out crystal clear from the very beginning of all of this is that even though it had been over 2 decades, and that is really surprising to me, right? So 2 decades of our existing 11 core competencies, 25 years basically, they still held water. They still made sense. There was still immense relevancy in these 11 core competencies. However, a lot was learned through this process that allowed it to become more streamlined, more consistent, and really enhanced some of these concepts, not only for making them more succinct and more cohesive, but to make them more globally relevant. And so that was actually one of the findings. Something that came out is there were instances where the language wasn't really something that resonated globally. And the core competency that we're going to focus on most specifically today is actually a really good example of that. And I have just a couple slides here that capitalize or double click on some of these themes, which I don't know, I have a research background, so maybe I'm a nerd about this stuff. I promise I won't spend too much time boring you with it, but I just thought it was so cool when we really drill down to what were some of the themes that were illuminated through this process. 1, ethics, ethical behavior, confidentiality remains paramount. Just as important as that was 25, 27 years ago, that is just as important today. However, there was an important and intentional expansion of the coaching agreement. The former language of the coaching agreement within the core competencies really focused kind of on this overall coaching engagement agreement. But we know that a lot of the work that we're doing as coaches is being conducted within the context of an organization. And so when we're doing that, we have an agreement, we have kind of a contract and an acknowledgement with the overarching organization as a coach. We then have an overarching agreement with our participant or our client that we're working one-on-one with, where they set those goals for the overarching work that they'd like to do with us from the beginning until the end of that engagement. And And then as coaches, we also know that in our individual coaching sessions, we are setting intentions and goals and agreements for that specific session. So that was a huge theme that came out of this, is that competency needed to be expanded to look at all of those different contexts. And then enhancement of the partnership. Another great example where we're going to see this today in the competency we're going to dive into, where there were 3 PCC markers before, there are 4 now. And I would argue that the biggest change is that new 4th one is bringing in this language of partnership. So where we see most of the newness, so to speak, of this new model, one of the biggest tenets of this newness is going to be this idea of bringing the language and the concept of partnership throughout the entire model. And then the last couple themes here, just to briefly touch on the concept of professional development. So I just mentioned newness. All of the 11 core competencies are embodied in the new 8, but there is one that is brand new. We can't really point to a direct crosswalk between the former 11 and the new 8. And that's competency number 2, around a coaching mindset, which really dives into not just embracing that coaching mindset, but creating a disciplined, continuous learning and development path and practice for yourself, where none of us, regardless of how amazing and awesome we are, do we ever cross that threshold where we could say, yep, I'm it. I'm the perfect coach. There is no more development to be done, right? That's just not possible. And thank goodness, because wouldn't that be boring? I would never want to get to that point. So it's really bringing that in competency number 2, brand new competency number 2. And then that integration of client context and culture. So looking at things like the impact of family structure, values, and the holistic view of the client. So again, a little bit more of that global cultural lens and not just kind of that Western or United States specific focus on the competency model. So as we all are intimately familiar with, here are our 11 core competencies that we will be in some ways letting go of as we usher in the new updated core competency model of 8 competencies. So these are the 8. Today, we're going to be focusing on number 4, cultivates trust and safety. But also, I just wanted to point out that number 2 is the one that I had mentioned previously. That would be the one that if we had to kind of shine a light on what's brand new and just highlight that a little bit, it would be that embodies a coaching mindset, which is a very, very cool addition to have here. Now, as we talk about the similarities and the differences between the 11 and the 8, there are still the same major category clusters. The process is the same. But one difference is you're going to notice an intentional shift in language. Each of the descriptions of the new competencies are verbs, where many of them in the past were nouns. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. The new competency of embodies a coaching mindset that I've touched on a couple times, just again, that one is new. Also, some coaches, as we've had some really kind of academic and fun discussions and digestion of this new model, some coaches have really questioned the fact that there is not a specific competency around questions. Because we had powerful questions, right, as a former competency. But now that's kind of folded in under another competency to be a little bit more appreciative and recognizing. And that Danny might laugh when he hears me say this, but I always talk about, coaching out in the wild when we're out doing our thing, right? So when we're out kind of doing our thing as coaches, we're using a lot of different tools. And yes, powerful questions are just as important as they always have been. However, they're one tool, and we want to recognize all the tools that coaches use. Okay. All right. Everybody tracking with me so far? We're doing pretty good? Okay, good. So as we look at a little bit of a crosswalk, ethics stays the same. And then establishing the coaching agreement has now become establishes and maintains agreement. And I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit here, so let me actually look at it together. I did mention the verb piece. So if you guys look at the first word over on the left-hand side of the screen, which is the current 11 core competency model, and then you look at the first word of the description on the right-hand side of the screen here, which is the current or the new, or I should say the new core competency model, you're going to notice that intentional transition to a verb versus where in some cases it was actually a noun or not an action. But as we go through these, you'll see that is consistently kind of changing here. But again, this is not a revolution, but an evolution is the best way I would use to describe this. So establishing the coaching agreement establishes and maintains agreements. Establishing trust and intimacy becomes cultivates trust and safety. So that word intimacy, that's one of the words I was talking about where we apply that more universal lens to this model. That word intimacy doesn't mean the same thing and does not translate the same way or is directly across all languages and cultures. So that's another example of where we're looking at this from a more global lens and we're shifting that language with a great deal of intention. And then we can see that 4, coaching presence becomes maintains, verb, presence. 5, active listening becomes listens, verb, actively. And then this is where those kind of tool competencies are folded into one. So powerful questions, still there. It's not going anywhere. It's just not a standalone competency. Direct communication, and then all of the tools and skills that fall under creating awareness are now under one kind of master core competency of evokes awareness. And then those of you who were slightly more familiar with the Pcc markers of the current 11 core competency model, you may have known that once the ICF applied that lens of putting together Pcc markers, it became very hard for evaluators of coaching to actually differentiate or distinguish among the markers of designing action, planning and goal setting and managing and progress and accountability. There's so much overlap and dancing that happens between and among these that it is now represented as one core competency, the final and 8th core competency of facilitates client growth. Okay, so that's our overview, and let's go ahead and do our deeper dive into the competency that we are all here for today, which is cultivates trust and safety. So again, this one, very similar to the existing competency 3 of creating trust and intimacy. However, as the ICF was very intentional about that use of language, one of those things that came through during that research process was that word intimacy has different meaning, different interpretation across cultures. So this competency was updated to get at the core of what they actually meant here, which is creating that trust and that safe environment for coaching to take place in partnership with the client. So this does include partnering with the client to create that environment and maintain that relationship of mutual trust throughout the coaching. Now, what does that entail? So that entails things like respecting the whole person of the client. So that's kind of a reference to understanding important elements of cultural context, values, environment, experiences, beliefs of the client. And it also includes acknowledging and respecting and honoring their autonomy in the process. So when we say partnership, we're talking about equals, where it's not the coach is the sage on the stage who has all the answers. Thank goodness the client has come to you so you can impart your wisdom, right? As we know, we're going off the ICF definition of coaching here, which truly is about partnership, a partnering of equals through a coaching process that brings about greater awareness. So you guys are probably getting the gist that as I think about and talk about the transition of models, it really helps me to look at things kind of alongside each other, because I want to see what's changed, what's enhanced, and what's different. So that is a little bit of the approach that I'm taking today as I talk through some of this content. But if we look at the competency comparison, here is the description. So it still has 6 items, new and old. Here's the description of former competency 3, establishing trust and intimacy, and then new competency 4, cultivates trust, and safety. So what I want to do is just pause for a second and let everyone just kind of review that, take a look at that. And I'd love to hear what's jumping out at you. What are you noticing as far as how would you state an enhancement you see or a difference? Or even if there's something that you're specifically seeing that you think is a really good kind of comparison similarity between the two, both old and new.
This is Karen. I'll share a little bit, and I'm not going to probably say this that accurately, but it's the new, it seems like it's like giving the client more space. It's like acknowledging their presence in the relationship, or just on the left, it just seems like it's more of just what the coach is doing, but it seems like on the right, it's just allowing a lot more room for the client to show up as themselves.
I love that. Allowing more room
Mm-hmm.
for them to just kind of show up as themselves, and openness and appreciation for that. Thanks, Karen. And you're like the gold star student raising your hand. So thank you.
Well, that was actually, and I want to save this for later. I've been getting actually really caught up on the coaching mindset and coaching presence. So that was kind of a side on that later, but yeah, that was an initial question I had earlier. But.
About how that's kind of a new one, the coaching mindset.
Yeah, I'm just, and again, I want to make sure we focus in on this one competency now, but I'm finding myself, I'm a mentor coach, and I find I'm getting a little bit tripped up in how I explain the difference between those two competencies now. So we can totally save that for the end or another time, but
Absolutely.
those two, it just, yeah, they're not as clear to me anymore.
Well, let's see if we have time. If we do have time towards the end of the day, we can totally tackle that or talk about it offline, either way.
Sure.
Thanks, Karen.
Sheila,
Oh, Linda, go ahead. Hello,
I was
Karen.
just going to say that I like the word connectivity rather than intimacy, because intimacy, and I do like the safety part, because with vulnerability has to come safety. You cannot be vulnerable and open unless you create a safe space to learn, explore, and so forth.
I agree. I mean, can we really get to that place of full potential without the environment of safety? Is the question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Pam also put that the new is more actionable.
Yeah. I think, and we'll get to the markers in just a minute here, but as an assessor, I feel that as well. And I feel like that creates more consistency, better calibration, and therefore better assessment of the actual execution and application of these competencies. So I totally agree with that.
Hi, this is Beth. I feel like, and with the new competency, there's just more detail. It feels like on the left side, the old stuff perhaps didn't have enough detail about exactly what that meant. So I appreciate more of the detail, both with how the client showing up more, but also what it means to show genuine concern for the client's welfare and future. I mean, what does that actually mean? And I think it's more explained in the new competency.
I totally agree. Thanks, Beth. Anybody else? And maybe this is actually a good time for me to check in. How many of you are currently going through the process where you're going to have your coaching evaluated at some point in the near future?
Sheila, I just passed the recording part of the exam. Yay!
You did. I was going to reach out to you about that.
Yeah, so now I have to take the CKA. So if I could jump in Does it hurt to study the old and new competencies for the CKA, or is it better just to focus on the old?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll try to touch on this a little bit more explicitly towards the end. But the ICF, as we know, is in a transition period right now. We're going to talk about the markers, which super exciting. Just last month were the new PCC markers unveiled. So the new competency model was introduced a year ago, so in November of 2019, and then the new PCC markers were just created and shared in November, a month ago. So that is the next big step, is getting all of the assessors trained up on the new PCC markers. But the coach knowledge assessment, or CKA as it's abbreviated, that Linda's referring to, is one of the things that coaches going for credential certification through the ICF need to take. Either your ACC, PCC, or MCC level, you need to take the coach knowledge assessment. And it covers three things. It covers the ICF definition of coaching, it covers the ICF code of ethics, and it also covers the ICF core competencies. Now, they're still in the process of creating, and then when we create a standardized test, it requires validation and testing of those test questions before they actually unroll. So roll that out. So they are not going to officially be moving towards assessing, both in the performance evaluation and the coach knowledge assessment, the new core competency model until right now. They're estimating about May 2021. So the summer, approximately halfway through 2021. There's still going to be all kinds of kind of bridging and interim time where they're looking at both and things like that. So for Linda, you're going to be taking this very, very soon. So you do not need to focus on studying the new core competency model. I don't feel it would hurt you in any way because they are so related, but I would focus your time and attention on the current 11 competencies for the test.
And that's what Pam just said. She said, I just completed my certification under 11 competencies. I believe if you complete your certificate this year, it will be under the 11 core competencies, just like you said, Sheila.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it might be aspirational. They're aiming for May of 2021, but I think it's safe to say the second half of 2021. Oh, and Lisa's also preparing for the test. Fantastic. Cool. All right. So to kind of give you guys a little bit of a look into, as an assessor, what are we looking for? So in this competency, it's really evaluating that there's respect for the client and their contribution, and that there's that space being created for the client to do their best work. And what you're looking for is it's not just a one-off. So at any level, ACC, PCC, MCC, we are using these PCC markers. Now, 10 years ago, the markers didn't even exist. So what would happen is an ICF evaluator, two evaluators would get the same, what Linda was just talking about, her performance evaluation. So she sent in her recording, and what it used to be 10 years ago is two evaluators would get it, and they would have, the 11 core competencies, and they would be said, okay, rate them between a 1 to a 10. 1 not so great, 10 pretty awesome, without much description or kind of anchored rating scale whatsoever in there. And so, as you can imagine, it was a little bit messy. Very often it needed to go to a third assessor, a tiebreaker, to kind of come in, and the calibration was way off. It was so clear that in order to professionalize and continue to grow in the sophistication of our profession, coaching growing into a profession, we needed to upskill around this assessment process. So that's where this need for PCC markers came from. Now, they knew that the new competency model was on the horizon, and that's why they hadn't officially expanded into a set of MCC or ACC markers. I can assure you that is coming. They've got to get all these other pieces in play, but eventually there will be ACC markers and MCC markers. But right now, PCC markers are used to evaluate all levels of coaching. So as you can imagine, these markers are hit on much more heavily and consistently at the MCC level than they would be at the ACC level. and they're fairly well hit on at the PCC level. So it needs to be evidenced, more than once, where it's not just that you don't interrupt one time in the conversation, but that you consistently, allow the client space to talk and process. But the PCC markers are created to allow assessors to be able to actually assess evidence of the competency. So when we say markers, that's what we're talking about, actual artifacts within a conversation, evidence of a competency happening. So as an assessor, it was like an alleluia, like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. And then as you can probably imagine, the calibration and the consistency started to really, really fix itself over time after the introduction of something like this. So let's talk about the PCC markers. Like I said, they were just revealed last month. You can go onto the ICF website and you can see that both the current PCC markers for the 11 core competencies, as well as the brand newly released PCC markers for the 8 core competencies. Now we've moved in this competency of the trust, we've moved from 3. So you can see those at the bottom of the screen here. Here's the 3 former markers to 4. So there is now 4. And we actually could say that the first 3 are somewhat similar. There are definitely some similarities. Even some of the actual, evidence of what assessors are listening for in these markers, very much the same between, the former one and the new one. But this 4th one is the one we could say is a little bit more of an addition. And there's that word partners again. So as you see partners really being brought in, that word and that concept of partnership really being brought into the model throughout, you're going to see it encompassed in the PCC markers. So there it is right in marker 4.4, the coach partners with the client by inviting the client to respond in any way. Okay. Any questions about PCC markers or about the new markers at a high level before we start looking at each one in a little bit more depth standalone? And I have a couple questions coming into the chat here, so I'm going to try to manage that too. Okay, so thank you. Does anyone have any tips for studying for the exam? Those 3 things are the tips. The ICF definition of coaching, code of ethics, and the core competencies. Focus on those. You are going to be in great shape. The ICF website has some exemplar questions. They're all multiple choice, but if you're like me, I love to see an example. So there are some examples out there on the ICF website. Check them out for some extra bolstering. You do have 3 hours to take the test, Pam said. It's not like, although a lot of testing centers are currently shut down for standardized tests and they're finding creative ways to do that, but the ICF's never used the testing center model. They send you the link. You take the test from your own, home. Now most of us are home, so from wherever. Okay, can you distinguish between support for the client and being directive or advising? So when we talk about support, we're still talking about acknowledging without judgment. Now, this is a fine line for a lot of us as coaches to walk, because a lot of individuals who are drawn to coaching, drawn to the coaching intervention and profession, it's because why? It's because they really enjoy helping people. And even that word in and of itself of helping implies a little bit of a power distance. I have the ability to help you, something you don't have, right? So if we talk about support, we're talking about an acknowledging without necessarily being overly affirming. Because even if we're being very positive and affirming, which most of us could argue that positive, it's right there in the definition, that's a good thing. We need to be careful as coaches that we're not inserting too much of that judgment, even if it's positive, where we're saying, that's great, or that's awesome, that's fantastic, great work. Versus, I just want to acknowledge all the work you put into that. There's a difference there, right? Because we could get into a situation where a client's then kind of looking to get that affirmation from us, or they're looking for our okay, our approval as the coach. So we want to stay away from kind of that judgment, both negative judgment as well as positive judgment. So support, I would think of it as acknowledging really enabling a client through acknowledgement. Trying to keep looking at the questions. Karen shared a video for everyone if you want to copy that from the chat here. Curious to hear insights on how we apply clients' culture and context that are infused in other core competencies, and cultivating trust and safety demonstrates respect for the client's identity, perceptions, style, and language. A big part of this, Murray, and I love that question, a big part of this is really listening to learn and being curious about the client's perception, perspective, and lens, whether it's how they're using a word, how they're perceiving something, and trying to work really hard as we do as coaches to remove our lens and our context and be really open and curious about the client's perspective, their lens, their context, and their map of the world. Is this being recorded? And it sounds like, yes, it is being recorded. Can you take the coach knowledge assessment anytime? Yes. I believe what they do is once they send you the link, you have a couple week window to take it. It's something like that. It's been so long since I've taken it, but it's something like that. An example of support without judgment. So I think it's that acknowledgement. So rather than saying, you did a really great job, you worked so hard, that was perfect. It could look like saying something like, I want to acknowledge everything that you put into moving towards this week. So it's acknowledging their work in the process without us telling them that was perfect. That's exactly what you needed to do. I'm being kind of dramatic when I say that, but hopefully it's kind of painting that picture. Pam said she had 60 days to take it. The coach knowledge assessment. You guys are keeping me on my toes switching between subjects here. I need another cup of coffee. All right, awesome questions, great points, and fantastic sharing and contributions in the chat. Thanks, everyone. All right, so marker 1, coach acknowledges and respects the client's unique talents, insights, and work in the coaching process. So what does this look like? I would love to hear, can anyone come up with or think of an example? What might an example of this PCC marker actually look like?
I have an example.
Yeah, Cheryl.
I had a client during one of our sessions. Her main goal of that session was to figure out how to make more money using her art.
Uh-huh.
And so it came up during the time that she was afraid to put her stuff on Instagram because she thought that people would, judge her and say mean things and those kinds of things. And so I asked her about, tell me a little bit about your training. And so she said she had an MFA, and I said, was that an easy process? And she said, no. And so I said, what makes you qualified to be an artist? And so she said all these things, and it helped her to realize that she had some really unique gifts and talents, and she was a very talented artist. And she had been in shows and juried shows, she had won awards. And so by asking her to reaffirm herself, she was able to see that, her beliefs that people would say mean things about her was unfounded. And knowing how social media works, that it was likely that somebody would say something, and how would she handle that? So I thought that might be a good example of this.
That's an awesome example. And Cheryl, I feel like you might have shared that story with me before, and you're reminding me that I want to write that down, because I just feel like there's so many times I could be like, wow, one coach shared this perfect example with me, and I want to share your example. So let me know if I have your permission to credit you with that. I love that story.
Sure. Yeah.
I love that story. Any other thoughts bubbling up for anyone of what this might look like in your coaching, or where you actually have seen this happen in your coaching?
This is Karen. I'm not sure. And I'm actually curious if this would count as an example or not. I had a client that I was working with who we did like 3 coaching sessions together, and he just really struggled to set goals or follow up on goals or things like that. And then he completely dropped off the radar for like 3 months over the summer. And, as a coach, it's kind of frustrating, and you really want to help and you want to, encourage them in that, but he just wasn't having it. And so I kind of let things go, and he came back in kind of mid-September. And unbeknownst to me at the time, he had used the time over the summer to really, some of the questions that I had asked him, or that he actually on his own, like really took them seriously and did a lot of internal work and reflecting. And when he came back this next time to coaching, he was really, what I would say, ready. And so I don't know if that really hits this one or not, but it's hard. It was hard as a coach to just kind of let it be and not try to force the process on him. And like I said, he was kind of doing his thing in that time. So it was almost like he was experiencing coaching without me there. If that makes sense.
It's like the type of thing that brings a tear to other coaches' eyes when we hear this type of thing. Like they're on their own and they're doing it, they're taking what they learned from me, right? So I absolutely think that could apply. Karen, I love that.
It was hard as the coach, but it was like, he came back, and it's like, I was really amazed at how much he had been doing.
Yeah.
I have an example. This is Bob.
Hi, Bob.
I had a client, or have a client, who had reached a stage of we were working on some deep work, and he really admitted that this work was really scaring him. And so we backed off. But what I complimented him on was that he recognized that he had reached a level, as someone said to me, they'd pushed into their panic zone instead of out just beyond their comfort zone. And that was quite difficult for him to continue. He was willing to work. And so we shifted focus to his career design instead of his deeper emotional issue. So so that was one place where I was able to compliment him on knowing when to stop an area that and he told me, he let me know loud and clear that this was something that he just did not feel comfortable pursuing for a while. So
yeah, I think that's a perfect example, Bob, and another example of that acknowledging, right? And sometimes clients need that acknowledgement. They're just in it, right? They're in the middle of it and they're in it. That invitation to pause and say, let's just acknowledge what you just did there, and even inviting them to reflect on that acknowledgement can be so powerful. So such a cool example, Bob. Let me share, by no means is this an exhaustive list, but let me share a few more examples of what this may look like, right? But integrating things from the past. So that might show up when we're assessing coaching, where, we didn't hear the previous 5 sessions that you had with that client, but there's a time where you bring that acknowledgement in and you say something like, you just mentioned that you worked on this. And I remember 2 sessions ago, you said that you were very anxious about committing to that. So I just want to pause for a second and acknowledge that, you put that hard work in, even though it felt scary. But you guys, I don't know, I should update my example list with all the fantastic examples that you all just brought here. That was perfect. And then we have marker 2. Coach shows support, empathy, or concern for the client. So this could be very explicit. What support do you need here? How can I support you here? Acknowledging their thinking. Or something that might be a little bit more indirect, unlike those examples, could simply be supporting them by giving them that space to think. So as coaches, most of us can remember back when we first started, maybe for some of us it was longer ago than others, that, that second of silence felt like a minute. 10 seconds of silence felt like an eternity, right? And as human beings, we do not like Silence. It's kind of like why HR professionals love to use that as a tool in an interview. If you give someone enough silence, they're going to say something they shouldn't say, right? Because we don't like silence. It's uncomfortable. But usually silence for a client, if we're stepping on that too much, it's not giving them enough time to be fully supported in their own reflection and thought process. Now, this might tie in a little bit to, I think it was your question, Linda, but support is not the same as caretaking. So we could make empathetic comments. We could express confidence. We could reflect the progress that we're hearing them share. We can acknowledge, and we can demonstrate that patience, that space, and that silence that allows them to be fully reflective. But I know that this personally helps me. And if this doesn't resonate with you, the invitation is to think about what language, what words do resonate with you. But for me, it's that support is not the same thing as caretaking. Two different things. Caretaking removes the partnership, right? Because we're in charge. We're the person coming in to fix it. I don't know. Does that resonate with anybody else? Maybe just I'll pause for a second for a little bit of a check-in.
Yeah, that's resonating with me. It's almost like that's when we go into like parent mode.
Yeah, caretaking parent. Thanks, Karen. And you guys see what I mean about the silence? If I let enough painful silence fall, someone's going to step in to save me. So thank you, Karen. I appreciate it.
Happy to help demonstrate that.
Well done. Well done. All right. And then marker number 3, the coach acknowledges and supports the client's expression of feelings, perceptions, concerns, beliefs, or suggestions. And this could be just, again, that, listening with curiosity, deep levels of active listening where we're listening with that open will, right? So when we're listening with an open heart and an open will, which is what we strive to do as coaches, that's different than listening to respond, listening to share our thoughts or ideas, but we're really listening so openly that we're even willing to be changed by what we're hearing. I don't know, maybe the world would just be a better place if we could all get better at that, but it's one of those things where that's really easy to say. I teach that, so I talk about it all the time, and I will be the first person to tell you that doesn't make it any easier to do it in practice, to officially do it. Now, as an assessor, for example, this marker would be very negatively impacted if someone was constantly stepping on the client, talking over them, interrupting them, coming in with their own thoughts and ideas. Not that there isn't a strategic way to, interrupt the client on occasion, that has value and intention behind it. But if we're constantly stepping on the client, that would be a reason as an assessor that I would actually not mark this marker. So that use of silence comes in here again, really to allow the processing and reflection on feelings. Offering in a way without attachment that we're very open to the client, disagreeing or having a different take. And that in constant, invitation to the client. Having said that, how do you feel about that? What are the feelings there? Just kind of opening it up as a consistent, open invitation for the client.
I have something I'd like to share.
Yeah, go Bob.
So as I have spent more time coaching, I find the greatest temptation to teach more. And I work in an area where there is a lot of learning to be done, the business development work for new entrepreneurs. So this is an appropriate amount of teaching that I do. But I also find that I often that the temptation to teach is greater as I get further from my original qualifications as a coach. I feel like I'm not listening as well. So it's something, this is important to bring me back and help. I noticed this in myself the last couple of weeks, and I've had to be much more conscious of it. It's interesting. The more experience we have, the more we can fall into this this trap.
I so wholeheartedly agree, Bob. I think many of us can relate to exactly what you're saying. And it's one of those things where we talk about competency number 2 of that mindset and the growth and kind of focus on intention around our development and continuous development, where a lot of coaches, I find that once we get our PCC or our MCC, we're out there doing our thing on this island and we're like, well, hey, I'm pretty awesome. So this value of there's intention why the ICF wants supervised coaching to be happening. And I think it is valuable as you're seeking out, coaching mentorship and supervision. Seek out someone who is trained in or does this type of assessment so they know the markers and what they're looking for. But I make it a discipline to do that annually. I work with another coach, mentor, to listen to my coaching and give me feedback. Because you're out there on an island, like, I think I'm doing it good. I think I'm doing great. You're helping people, right? So bringing it back, like you said, and looking at it through that lens of this new core competency 2 of the coaching mindset is just so powerful, so powerful. And Dale, did you have your hand up?
Hi. I'm an ADHD executive functioning coach. And so I ask, this is a question, but I'm going to state it as I ask permission to go out of coaching and into advising. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that is a great practice to get into. And I talk about that all the time when I'm training coaches and mentoring coaches. Is it's not like as a coach, we're going to sit there and say, oh, well, I actually know something that would really help you, but I'm not going to tell you, so it's like not like we're playing that kind of a game. But I love how you describe that, where you're very clear with your client that you share or even ask permission. Is it okay if I step out of coaching mode for a moment to share something with you, to share an idea, a suggestion, or share a time that, I did something that worked well? And then there could be kind of clarity of transitioning back to, okay, so as we step back into coaching now, so there's clarity around that. Now, when you're submitting your performance assessment for the ICF, would I advise that you submit a 30-minute session where 20 minutes is of you stepping out of your coaching hat? No, with that, probably not what you want to submit. But coaching out there in the wild, yes, absolutely.
I have a question about that. That's in some settings, I can imagine the pausing to teach and then step back in. That's really can be quite artificial in the normal course of conversation. So I'm wondering, does anyone else feel that is awkward or makes the conversation and flow awkward or creates a distraction?
I know Beth had her hand up, but maybe just if I jump in there for a second, Bob, and we could even put this in the parking lot in case we have more time, which may not be the case, but it doesn't hurt to be optimistic. Part of it is, really setting up that clear expectation with our clients at the beginning of the coaching engagement, where it's almost like we each have our elevator pitch, right? Where how do we describe what coaching is to someone? How do we describe, what they can expect as we're working together? What is coaching? What coaching isn't? Now, for some coaches, they really are doing both coaching and consulting. So it might be helping a client to understand that at the beginning, that sometimes we're going to be in consulting and teaching mode, and sometimes we're going to be in coaching mode. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's kind of creating your talking points, your process, your segue that feels authentic. It feels organic and it doesn't feel choppy, or it doesn't feel, I think you said, inauthentic in some way. So playing with that a little bit so you can find kind of how you introduce that, how you seek that permission or make that transition.
I'd like to jump in, Sheila, if I could. I think silence is awkward because we're taught in corporate and professional jobs that we got to fill, we got to know everything, we got to talk, we got to do this. But sometimes that awkwardness is a really, really powerful tool to get the client to like take responsibility and to do some deep thinking. Sometimes I'll ask the question, the same question 3 times, and the client will go, oh no, like, what do you mean? Well, what do you mean? And I'll even make a joke. Well, guess what I'm going to say? What do you mean? And they're like, oh no, she's asking me to go deeper again. But some of those things are really effective, like even silence, even though it is, I do find it very awkward as well.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing. Gosh, we should set these up for like 3 hours long, not 1 hour long, right? We've all got way too much good stuff to share with each other in 1 hour, but we'll be compliant before Cheryl has to pull me off the stage here. But the fourth and final marker before we move to a little bit of a close, I do want to mention it because, as I said before, this is the one that would be a little bit newer. So they're still kind of formulating the assessor training on this one. But the coach partners with the client by inviting the client to respond in a way to the coach's contributions and accepts the client's response. So this really is, again, that offering without judgment, offering in a way that the client is completely open to agreeing or disagreeing. It's that partnership where we respect the client's perspective, the client's lens, their ideas. If they say that they need this kind of support, it's not us saying, actually, I think the support you should have is this, right? It's trusting the client's wisdom and expertise as an expert in their own lives. But as an assessor, this is the type of thing where this is so fun to play with something new, a brand new marker. This is awesome. How are we gonna bring this into our coaching and help others to bring that into their coaching? So next steps, and this is what Linda helped us to talk about a little bit early on, so we don't need to spend too much time here, but one of the biggest next steps after they unveiled the new competency model was updating the PCC markers, and check that box. We got them last month, which is awesome. So as we talked about, they now are in the process of creating and validating the new test questions. So kind of that test construction, and then some potential equivalence training. So what would that look like as people kind of bridge or crosswalk between the two models? And then there is minimum skill requirements guidance. So some of you might be familiar with the minimum skill requirement tables that are out there on the ICF website. I have a feeling, Sheila's opinion is that that's going to start to actually go away, and we're going to move more towards this marker process. So ACC markers, MCC markers, to complement and expand on those PCC markers. Most of the translations have already happened of the core competencies. Just a few more need to take place, and then those same translations will be rolled out with the new coach knowledge assessment. Now, the first time I put the slide together, they said early 2021. You guys have heard the new estimate from me. It's going to be at least the middle of 2021. And with that, I have 2 minutes to spare, which I know doesn't allow us a lot of time for questions. I wish we did. I would love to just do an hour of questions with everybody. You guys have such great ideas and thoughts coming through. Happy to take a few that we have time for. And of course, as always, so happy to connect with anyone offline if that would be helpful. Oh, thanks, Jenny. And Sidar, absolutely, thank you.
I know Beth had raised her hand earlier. Did you still have a question or comment, Beth?
Oh, I was just going to comment when when the marker is to invite like your client, and if they might disagree with you or something about what you've offered, and that happened to me with a particular client. I coach at the time. I was coaching families who have loved ones with substance abuse issues, and so we were coaching about setting boundaries. And honestly, she thought I was too harsh. And so she didn't want to continue coaching with me. And, but then she came back, and as we, and I was asking her about what she needed, that's when I learned something really important about helping people set, when they're working with this, because it's a very tender topic with someone who has a loved one with addiction issues. but it's baby steps. And so that really forced me to learn about what were her baby steps to setting boundaries. And then, you know, and just, you know, not trying to go for the firm boundary right off the bat, you know. And so that was really helpful to me, that not everybody
I love
wants
that.
to set really profound boundaries from the get-go. They have to start somewhere. And she was more, we had to start with really easy things and work up.
I think that's a great example. Maybe just to throw one last thing out that would kind of fall into that same category. It would be acknowledging, but again, open to disagreement of, now I'm sensing a little bit of resistance here, but you tell me what might that be that is sitting there that I'm sensing, you know? So it's not you just saying that they're being resistant, it's telling you that you are sensing it, and you are, but maybe that's not what it is. So inviting them to tell you what they think it is.
Thank you.
Got it. Well, thank you all so much for being a fantastic group today. I just find myself so energized coming out of these, and looking forward to the next opportunity to spend an hour with all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. And we appreciate you as always, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow on our holiday special.
Thank you so much. Great session.
Have a good
Thank
day,
you,
guys.
guys.
Everyone,
Thank
have a
you,
good
Sheila.
day.
Bye.